Today's Redevelopment Agency Board meeting. Due to the ongoing practice of social distancing, RDA meetings will continue to be entirely remote, which, as you all know, means there isn't a location to attend meetings in person. And we do hope that one day we will gather in person again. And although we are conducting our meetings electronically, and it is different from our very familiar in-person public process, at this point, these electronic meetings are beginning to feel more familiar than when we were all meeting in person. So we do welcome members of the public who may be watching our usual video feeds on the City Council's agenda page, YouTube, SLC TV, or Facebook Live. We enjoy hearing from you and hope that you are all staying safe. As always, we start our RDA meetings out with general comments to the board. As a reminder, written comments can be submitted to the RDA offices at P.O. Box 145455, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114. Your comments about any RDA business, or if you have any feedback to give us regarding today's meeting setup, please feel free to contact us. Just to go over a few things, just when we were meeting in person, the board does have a system for receiving public comment. It is important to continue that engagement to ensure an orderly, non-disruptive, efficient, and safe opportunity for all people to comment, even when we are meeting virtually. We are accepting public comments through both WebEx, and for those whose only option is to call in, staff will be monitoring a separate telephone line to include any callers into the meeting. I will go over the process for today. Our meeting host will identify the callers in the order they have arrived via WebEx. He will state the name of the first person to comment, followed by the next commenter who can then prepare to speak. When the meeting host unmutes your line and lets you know it's your turn, please state your first and last name, just as you would in our in-person meetings. Indicate the topic you are speaking on, and the 2-minute timer will begin. At the 2-minute mark, we will announce time and your microphone will be muted. To limit disruption and ensure the efficient operation of our meeting, the first and last name given cannot include a message or violate our rules of decorum. If your registered name doesn't meet this requirement, then our staff will use the chat feature to gather that information from you. If you are unable to give a first and last name that meets this requirement, our staff is happy to direct you to another forum because your message is important to us. To help facilitate our comment period, please be respectful. Avoid yelling and making racial slurs, obscene, or defamatory remarks. I think, as many of you know, we very much welcome public comment, but want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and respected as they are giving and listening to others' comments. So please consider that when you make your comment. At this point, I will turn to Bobby to see if we have any comments. Maybe turn to Bobby.
Madam Chair, it looks like Bobby's muted, and I don't know if maybe he's messaging with someone or having technical difficulties. So just give us a minute.
Not a
Sorry.
problem. We should play the Jeopardy theme music when we're waiting, you know, for the final Jeopardy. Do, 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 do.
Madam Chair, I think we can move on. And then if I hear from, oh, let's see, I just got a message from Amanda that there is one commenter.
Okay.
But I'm wondering if Bobby is having technical difficulties, how that commenter will get in the meeting. So if you could just, let's see, give me 1 minute and I'll figure out how we're going to get him in the meeting. So thanks for your patience, everyone. Okay, I think the new plan is that Amanda.
I'm here and I can help get our commenter. All right.
Thanks, Amanda.
No problem. Well, RDA board, we have one commenter here today, and that's George Chapman. George Chapman, your mic is unmuted. Feel free to start your comment now.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is George Chapman, and I have a problem with RDA considering the SRO on Jefferson Street, I believe it is, around 17th South. None of the single-family homeowners in the area knew anything about it, and I appreciate you saying no to the loan, but the RDA should make a better effort, and the Housing Authority of Salt Lake City should make a better effort to notify everybody in the neighborhood, especially the next door neighbors. They were pretty upset when they heard about it, and this city should be providing a more respectful relationship and public engagement with the public. So before you even consider another loan to an SRO or higher density project in a residential neighborhood, please ensure that the city goes door to door, knocking on doors, making sure people know that something big could happen. So thank you for turning down the loan, but if you consider it again in any way, shape, or form before you go forward, you should make sure there's enough public engagement. Nobody cared enough or knew enough to comment on it before. Those are my comments. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, George. Amanda, did we have anyone else?
That's all we had. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If anybody does end up logging in, I know sometimes this can be tricky, please feel free to interrupt and we will make sure that their comments are heard. But with that, we will move forward. We do not have any other public hearings. We are on agenda item C1, which is a resolution adopting an updated RDA art policy. And I will turn it over to Danny. I see that we also have Tracy Tran with the RDA here with us and Felicia Vaca with who's our Arts Division Director. Danny, it's all yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, good to see you today. This first item we have for you is a follow-up to the presentation and consideration for updating the RDA public art policy. We do not have planned any presentation today, as much as we are here available to follow up and answer any questions that the board may have as part of or prior to consideration.
Any questions, anyone? No, nothing. We're just ready for a motion to adopt this new policy. I feel good about it. It's going to be a quick and easy meeting.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I also am supportive of this. It's incremental movement towards a more artistic city, I guess, put it that way. I love the sense of building this in as an automatic thing. We don't have to think about it, but we'd have great benefits come from it. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Madam Chair, I move to adopt the resolution.
Second.
And I apologize. I am slightly distracted. I'm trying to help somebody get logged in. And motion from Board Member Wharton, a second from Board Member Johnston. So with that, I would do a roll call. Board Member Dugan.
Yes.
Board Member Mott.
Yes.
Board Member Rogers.
Yes.
Board Member Wharton.
Yes. Yes.
And Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Great. I am a yes, and that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. It's a good policy. Okay, sorry, distracted. I'm trying to multitask with helping people get on. Thank you, Felicia. Chris, Board Member Wharton, do you mind muting yourself? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I thought I did.
We are on to C2, which is our housing allocation policy follow-up. And we have Danny and perhaps Tammy with us for this item.
Very much more so than just perhaps. We're going to just turn it directly over to Tammy because we all know that she's the resident expert on this. So Tammy, take it away. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Danny. Madam Chair, I have a really short presentation to run through, if I may. Okay, let me share my screen. All right, so what we have been working on for several months has boiled down to the formation of two separate policies for housing within the RDA. And the first policy that you see here, the RDA Housing Allocation Funds Policy, there's actually a draft policy resolution in your packet for review today. And this is the policy that establishes guidelines for allocating and directing resources for the development and preservation of housing. And then in January, we plan on bringing a draft housing development loan program policy for the board's review and consideration. And this is the actual program that the board has been asking us to develop that will provide that one-stop shop to administer funds for housing development and preservation within the city. So getting into the policy resolution that's included in your packet today, this policy resolution essentially does three things. It establishes housing funds in terms of accounting and monitoring these funds. And these four housing funds that we will get into are basically split up by the source of funding. And so we can keep these sources separate to comply with statutory and reporting requirements. And also keeping these funds in separate accounts lets the board, if they wish, allow for prioritization within each funding source for a specific purpose, need, or policy objective. It also allows for an annual budgeting process. It creates that process, and it also establishes reporting requirements with the board. So this framework you have seen before, and this is what the policy resolution was essentially drafted from. These are the four housing funds. The primary, which are it's the account that statutorily the RDA needs to set aside tax increment for housing. So all of those funds would go into the primary housing fund. The secondary housing fund, that would be for discretionary funds that the RDA board can set aside if they wish for housing. So that'd be housing funds on top of the ones that are required. The Northwest Quadrant Housing Fund, which would all of the Inland Port Housing Fund pursuant to state statute would go into this source. And then the Housing Development Fund, this is what we're calling kind of the funding source or the funding pot where all of the city sources, such as the Funding Our Future sales tax funds, would be deposited into. So these are the 4 housing funds, and then we're proposing that on an annual basis, the RDA shall present to the board an annual housing development funding strategy that proposes the programs and activities to be funded over the upcoming fiscal year for the board's consideration. And this funding strategy would allow us to look at funding sources across citywide sources, collaborate with our colleagues in community and neighborhoods, and identify really needs and opportunities on an annual basis to direct housing resources to. And it would allow us to do things like, if there was a strategic opportunity that year to, say, acquire a strategic site for redevelopment or for housing, we could propose allocating a little bit more money that year for acquisition. Or in other years, we might want to propose allocating most of the funds to gap financing to leverage and assist with private development projects. And leaving the policy a little bit vague on these funding priorities will allow us to be flexible as the housing plan changes, as other policies internally change in regards to housing. So, of course, the board has the final budget authority to approve those funding allocations as they wish. And then, of course, it would be up to the administration to take those funding allocations and implement the projects. I would like to point out that the board may want to consider today these policy priorities by the fund. We've left them pretty vague. The primary housing fund, it calls for implementing housing goals and objectives that are identified in the city's housing plan. The secondary housing fund identifies policy priorities within the RDA's project area plans, because these are discretionary funds that the RDA is allocating above and beyond what is required. And so to be good taxing entity partners, we may want to consider helping to implement those project area plans. The Northwest Quadrant Housing Fund, the 2 priorities we put in there are to prioritize funding for Northwest Quadrant adjacent neighborhoods, which we've identified as west of I-15, and for activities and projects that improve opportunity indicators in those neighborhoods. And then the housing development funds, the sales tax and the city funds, we've left that pretty vague as well, just pointing back to carrying out the goals and objectives of the city's housing plan. So those are the overall policy priorities, but again, on an annual basis, we can get more specific on the funding priorities.
Tammy, I'm going to interrupt you real
Sure.
quick right there.
Sure. Do we
Just
want
to see.
go back?
Yep. Just to see, I can't see anybody's hand, but just to see if anybody has any specific questions just on this slide. That's a lot of information while we've heard it and we've been working on it for a while. Just want to make sure to see if there's any questions on this part of it.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, of course.
I have a question. Given that we have now these 4 separate funds, I think it makes perfect sense based on the source of the funds and how they all have different statutory regulations. My question is the use of the funds. Say there's one project that maybe is in the Northwest Quadrant and or wherever, but it can fit the requirements of multiple funds. How complicated would it be for, and maybe it's a project we all really support, would it be possible for one project to pull from different funds simultaneously? And if that's possible, is there a risk of that being abused and maybe being like a developer triple, quadruple dipping in the different funds? Does that make sense? How do we?
I can answer that. So the next policy that we don't have a draft of the policy resolution yet, it will be brought to you in January, but it's for the program for gap financing to administer all the gap financing funds. And the way we're setting it up is on an annual basis, the board can allocate money to that program from each of the housing funds. So we're contemplating that projects very well could pull from multiple funding sources. But as far as the developer or the applicant is concerned, it's in terms of gap financing, at least, it's one application, one review and approval process. So it's kind of that one-stop shop process for the public, but on the back end, RDA staff, in the framework of what the RDA board has approved, of course, in terms of the budget, we would kind of puzzle piece together what loan should be funded most appropriately from what source in that framework. So we would do that all on the back end.
Great, thank you.
And of course, a different type of project, like if there were a strategic property acquisition, we could very well pull from multiple funding sources as well and do that through the annual budget process.
Thank you, Tammy. Was there any other questions on this? Okay, thanks, Tammy.
Sure. The second policy that we just want to briefly update you on, but like I said, this one, a draft will be coming forward to you in January. So I won't go into too much detail, but as I was just speaking of, the Housing Development Loan Program policy, we've tweaked the name a little bit. This is what we had been calling the Housing Development Trust Fund. But as we started to draft the policies, we thought that was a little confusing with the 4 housing funds we were just talking about, and it's not really a trust fund. It's a program that's drawing from the different funds. So we've renamed it the Housing Development Loan Program, and it would, as I said, pull from the 4 funds to provide a centralized program. The board could identify annual funding amounts and funding priorities for that year. So for example, through the annual funding strategy that we were just talking about that we would bring forward to the board each year, say there were Northwest Quadrant housing funds and we wanted to issue a NOFA, and the board before in previous meetings has mentioned that homeownership is a big priority. On that annual funding strategy, we could set aside money for a NOFA to promote homeownership on the west side, for example. So on an annual basis, we can get specific with the type of goals and objectives we're targeting. And then all funds would be issued through a transparent NOFA process. So that NOFA would be posted transparently, open to the public. We anticipate that most of the NOFAs would be competitive and time limited, but there may be instances where we have open-ended NOFAs for funds that are considered on first come, first served basis, like if the board wanted to set aside some money for emergency gap financing, that could be more appropriate just to be set aside first come, first served. And then we're also working on establishing a standardized underwriting and approval process. As you know, the different programs within the city right now have different underwriting standards and approval processes, so we want to streamline that into one process. And you've seen this chart before as well, but this is kind of what we're talking about with the 4 funds all feeding into the one program, going out and being approved with a standardized process. So the schedule we've laid out for you is what is in your packet today is the draft RDA Housing Allocation Funds policy that establishes those 4 accounts. We did not provide an approved as to form resolution yet. We thought you may want to review it in this meeting, and we can incorporate any feedback you may have, and we'll bring it back in January with that feedback incorporated. In January, we'll also have the Housing Development Loan Program policy ready for your initial review, and then bring that back possibly in February for approval. So we've had a lot of discussions on housing. These policies have been in the works for quite some time, but feasibly by February, we could have the policies adopted potentially. So are there any questions I could answer?
I don't see any hands up. I would like to pose to the board members that, I've had a chance to review the housing allocation policy. I hope you have. I assume that if there isn't any feedback, we could take a vote on it today, and then they could bring it back for ratification in January. Just because there was some noticing issues, and we don't have to. I'm simply posing it as an option that if we felt prepared to go forward. We did have a briefing on this housing allocation policy back, I think, in June or July. And so we've seen this before. This is the follow-up, and I'll kind of leave it to board members, but like I said, we could vote on it today and just have it ratified in January. If there's not feedback, if people feel like they have some feedback for the resolution, I'm fine waiting, just posing that suggestion.
Madam Chair.
Speak at once.
Madam Chair, I forgot to mention something. The Redevelopment Advisory Committee did review this policy resolution last week, and they recommended the policy as presented. So.
Great. Yes, Board Member Mono.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I guess I'll pose a question that is similar to other things I've asked in the past, which is there anything, do you see it appropriate within this policy to make any goals, or I guess within this ordinance to make any policy goals in terms of distributing the housing funds across different scale of projects, so that they don't all get eaten up by one or two large projects, but that we can also fund some smaller infill projects as well? Is there anything, is that appropriate within this ordinance, or could that be somewhere else? And again, I don't know that everyone agrees with me on that, but that's something that I think is a goal I have for RDA funds.
I think that's up to the board. What we tried to do within this policy was to leave the policy or the funding priorities and the policy objectives pretty vague, because it's really the housing plan and other policies that the Department of Community and Neighborhoods are working on in terms of citywide housing objectives, that we wanted to be flexible enough that we could make sure we're implementing and utilizing those as those change over time. So we could go back and look at different funding priorities if the board wishes, but we did try to leave flexibility in there.
And I would just add to that, Board Member Mono, that I think to your question, the primary goal of this policy is to really just identify the different buckets and make sure that we're following statute, and then as part of that incorporating both those statutory priorities as well as some of those larger big picture priorities. I think to your point, where that becomes a function of the board is in that when we do that annual housing report, and then as well as when you as a board approve our annual budget, you have opportunities at that point to identify how these funds would either be utilized within the NOFA and could put those types of preferences and requirements within that NOFA issuance, and or at any time as the board, you could approve and pull money out of the NOFA and do specific programs to accomplish priorities such as that. So you have a few different options, and I think that's what Tammy's indicating with the flexibility, that can be something you can put as far as requirements for the annual funding, and or something we can track as part of that annual report on how we're spending the funds, and if it's going to smaller developers or if it's just getting eaten up by larger projects.
And if I may, sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
Well, just really quick, an example of how it could be used is the 4.5 million that was set aside a few years ago for high opportunity funding. That could be one of the policy priorities on an annual basis that the board selects to implement. So it's really, we're trying to look at it annually so we can adapt to changing policies and opportunities.
And if I can jump in, I think just for maybe Darren and Dan's benefit, a lot of this, and Danny and Tammy can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the main reasons that we really wanted to look at this housing allocation is because the Northwest Quadrant money and the sales tax money were coming in. And so instead of trying to have one policy for all things, there are different priorities for each of those monies coming in. And so it's kind of a way for us to identify, like Danny said, those buckets, but then kind of be vague with how we use those buckets. But we needed something in order to understand what the Northwest Quad money was what kind of priorities we had. We've had discussions on that was put into this policy, and the sales tax money. So that might give a little bit of background of like why we needed to do this. There was we didn't want to confuse anything. We wanted to make sure the promises we made, for example, with the sales tax money, was this needs to go to affordable housing. So that needs to stay in its own, like this is kind of where it needs to be. And then, right, so I think that's kind of the background a little bit of where this policy in part stemmed from.
Thanks, that's all.
I mean, if I would entertain a motion, or you can tell me to wait, but I'm taking direction from you all.
Madam Chair, I'm okay to make the proposal that we approve the policy. Make the motion that we approve it.
Second.
I have a motion from Board Member Rogers and a dual second from Board Members Johnston and Dugan. I will go ahead and roll call this. Board Member Wharton?
Yes.
Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Board Member Dugan?
Yes.
Board Member Rogers?
Yes.
Board Member Mono?
Yes.
And I am a yes, so that will pass. And then we'll look to ratify this in January. Perfect. What's next on our list? Item C3 is the RDA 2020 projects review and 2020 projects preview. So again, I'll turn this over to Danny, Tammy, and Amanda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think before we start, I would really want to start with asking a question, because this presentation is being brought to you today at the request of Director Valdemoros, or Vice Chair, I should say, Valdemoros. And I feel a little guilty giving it without her actually here to see it. So we are happy to do it today in the presentation. And if that's something we then coordinate with her to do individually, or if by chance she's watching on TV, we certainly can go through it. But I wanted to just acknowledge that, because I didn't want to not pay respect to the fact that we are trying to respond to her request.
Well,
I didn't mean to complicate things, but I just realized that when she's not on this meeting. So we're certainly prepared and happy to do it, but I think where she, I assume would want to be involved in the discussion or questions. I don't know if that's something that we wish to postpone.
I am open. I know that I had asked as well for a project review of 2020, just so that it's our last RDA meeting of the year. But I'm happy to postpone it. I think if you're prepared to go forward, we should go forward now, and you can always redo it for Anna if need be. Is anyone opposed to that? Okay, take it away, Danny.
Yeah, we will do that. I think Tammy's going to take control of the PowerPoint so she can control that, and then also provide any input and additional information that I don't cover as we go along. So as you said, Madam Chair, this came as a request to recap what some of the projects are that we have accomplished in 2020, as well as looking forward to what we as an agency will be focusing on and prioritizing into 2021. And so next slide, Tammy, we wanted to go through it within that context of recapping some of the milestones and completed projects. And then, whoa, hi, Tammy, how fast do you want me to talk? And then looking ahead to 2021, as I said, and then also inform the board of some of the policy and program priorities that we are working on. So, next slide. So we've broken this down in quarters of how 2020, as far as projects were completed. You can see here within the first quarter of 2020, we were able to close both on the Charlie loan, which is a residential project just north of Pioneer Park and includes 90 condominium units, as well as phase 2 of the C9 Market loan, which is a mixed-use building just south of the market there on 900 South with retail spaces and 3 affordable units above. And then obviously COVID hit. So I want to give props to Amanda here that at this point in the presentation, she wanted us just to show a dumpster on fire floating down a flooded river and use that to essentially recap how the rest of 2020 went. But we felt the board wanted a little bit more detail on how the year went after that. So next slide, Tammy. Obviously the redevelopment agency, we are not, first line responders or had any immediate impacts with COVID, but what we did do is mobilize and reach out to those that we do have relationships with in terms of our tenants and in terms of our borrowers. And we extended an initial 90-day waiver on both our lease payments as well as deferrals on the loan payment. These waivers and deferrals have now been extended through the end of the calendar year, basically in compliance with the city proclamations and state of emergencies. And so that is an ongoing assistance that the agency has provided to our partners. But following that and following our initial pivot with COVID and working from home, I want to recognize the efforts of staff and the other city departments that we worked with to make it happen. But we were able to continue to close on 2 of our loans within the second quarter that we were working on, and these are the Diamond Rail housing projects and then the Jackson Apartments, which is the renovation of that building on block 67 into affordable senior units, renovating the historic components of it and upgrading it for ADA accessibility. Next slide. In the third quarter of 2020, we were able to issue our NOFA following our budget of $3.9 million that we selected 2 projects from. And then at the same time, the projects that were underway throughout 2020 celebrate both the groundbreaking of the Capitol Home apartments that the agency has a loan on, as well as the ribbon cutting for Pamela's Place, which is 100 affordable units. Tammy, I don't know if you want to jump in and add anything or updates on Capitol Home.
Capitol Homes is under construction, and just one clarification, I believe only one project was actually selected through the NOFA.
Oh, sorry, I should have said 2 proposals or applications were submitted, 1 selected. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. The board, you'll also remember that as part of the agency's annual budget, we assumed the management and programming of the Gallivan Center from the Public Services Department. This is probably not the best year to try to do that since it's been a little complicated with COVID, but we are still working through the transition of that as well as the transfer of that budget. But I very much want to give credit and props to Talitha and her staff. They were able to pivot immediately and continue the Excellence in the Community Concert Series, turning that exclusively into a live streaming web event twice a week. As of yesterday, they have continued with 69 performances at the Gallivan Center, and they just passed the threshold of 3 million streamed views. So their average viewership is between 3,000 and 63,000 per show. And Talitha would always be happy if anyone has questions on how this is going to brag, and explain how well it's doing, and that they've gone international even with some of their performances. So that is something that I think we are extremely proud of for GALLIVAN, and they've done an amazing job at keeping GALLIVAN going and doing these events through COVID. So next slide. And then in the fourth quarter of 2020, staff has closed on the West End loan, which this would be our first project, right, Tammy, and completion of a loan over in the 9-line project area.
Yeah.
That thanks to the use of the seed funds and approval by the board, they should be, when are they starting construction, Tammy? It's soon,
They're
right?
breaking ground soon. This is the project. They're on 9th South and I believe 750 West. They're across from the community garden by the pump track.
Well, and then hopefully you've seen the press release or some of the media coverage for the Art for Hope project. This was the brainchild of Corinne following COVID, in terms of wanting to continue to do something for public art while at the same time doing it through the pandemic and everything going on. And so this is a public art piece at 3 of our locations: at the Overnighter Motel in North Temple, our site on State Street in downtown, as well as the DI site in Sugar House, and as a way to infuse some support and participation for 33 local artists doing 43 individual pieces of art. And then I'll let Tammy brag about Spy Hop, because this is her project, but this is one that they have completed. And Tammy, you can give an update on how they're doing and when they may be able to schedule their grand opening.
Yeah, they have moved into their new facility there on the corner of 9th South and 2nd West by the tracks stop. They're very excited. This project broke ground and then COVID hit just a couple of months later, but they were able to keep the project construction on track and completed. I believe we have, well, these are Art for Hope photos. We have some pictures of Spy Hop next. These are some of the squares that were installed. This is the former Deseret Industries building, the fencing. I believe this is the State Street site, but the art is amazing and turned out great, and has been well received by the community.
And we've also set up an online gallery for this on our website, so people can view it that way as well.
And here are some photos of the completed Spy Hop project. It came in on budget and on time, which was very exciting. They have moved in, like I said, but they have postponed a formal ribbon cutting until after the pandemic is over.
So that recaps some of the major projects we accomplished in 2020. Looking ahead right now, RDA staff, we are tracking just about 100 projects that we're working on, and these range everywhere from development projects of infrastructure and placemaking, residential and commercial, through our loans and tax increment reimbursement. We are tracking individual plans and studies for project area creation and site development, our own policies, as well as the acquisition and disposition of properties, and obviously our ongoing property management of both GALLIVAN and Eccles and other pieces of property. So we have quite a bit in a wide range of projects that we're working on. And so we wanted to highlight just some of those larger projects that the board would be interested in or has taken action on that maybe we haven't provided an update on recently. So Utah Theater at 144 South Main Street, throughout the pandemic, the staff was able to continue selecting a consultant and working on and finalizing the archiving for the theater, which we hope to roll out fairly shortly in terms of to the public. We not only will have a presence for this on the internet, as well, it's also going to be archived up at the Marriott Library at the University of Utah. So something that we are extremely proud of in terms of being able to provide and meet that requirement for the demolition of the theater, as well as go above and beyond in terms of the amount of information that's been preserved and archived as that historic structure. And then also at the same time, we've been working on the design and property sale with Hines Development as they have been looking at finalizing their design, as well as providing the information that we need to bring back to the board for consideration and to meet our own requirements as far as the sale of that property. Then next slide, we've also been continuing to work through COVID on the working group for the JAPANTOWN visioning. This hit a little bit of a pause as we had to pivot to online meetings with the stakeholders in the working group, but we were able to get those back up and going and continue to work through the concepts and reviewing those and looking at their priorities for the site. This is something also in 2021 that we hope to bring to the board shortly in terms of what that has culminated in terms of the plan and the review, as well as what the next steps and how we've hopefully positioned that to start working towards actually implementing and taking action on those recommendations. Station Center is one that I think the board in 2020 we brought to you for a few of these items. Most recently was an update on the infrastructure design and the direction that we'd like to take that as far as continuing to refine that. We appreciate the board's actions on allocating funds for looking at stabilizing the mattress building, and we are working through that with our engineers and contractors to start trying to stabilize that and determine how we're going to do that. While at the same time, we have actively been working on property acquisition as well as our disposition strategy to return to the board and give an update on our recommendations for that. Marmalade block, the Harvest and Marmalade, if you've driven down 300 West, you can see that that is under construction and progressing rather quickly. So we anticipate doing a ribbon cutting for that in 2021, while at the same time as that project nears completion, we will also be looking at refining the design and doing a groundbreaking for the Marmalade Park, which sits between the Harvest housing project as well as the library and kind of has that internal open space to the block. So we are working on the final elements of that and hope to have that started in 2021. And then Central 9th, we continue to incorporate the placemaking and streetscape improvements within and around the Central 9th market as part of the city's larger efforts for 900 South. So we are working with engineering and transportation and public utilities to get that project underway, as well as we're looking to quickly re-release the RFP for our agency property at West Montrose, which is on corner of 7th South and 300 West, and try to get that out on the market for selection of a developer. And then within the Granary District, Tammy can provide an update, but we've continued our efforts of working with the Bicycle Collective and bringing their project to fruition. As well as doing a survey for not just the Granary area, but larger areas surrounding it in terms of what we may want to consider either for an extension or new project area consideration in and around the Granary area for development occurring there, as well as some of the other priorities with transit that we may want to look at establishing. Tammy, I don't know if you want to give a quick update on Bicycle Collective any more than what I've said.
Yeah, just that they have continued to fundraise for their capital campaign during the pandemic, and we're regrouping right now and establishing a new timeline, but it sounds like they could potentially break ground within a year on that project, and that's on 9th South, just east of I-15.
And then obviously, as you know, we continue to work on our property disposition and affordable housing projects. Most recently was finalizing the terms for an amended loan for 255 South State. We are working furiously to close on that property by the end of the year and put that together for a groundbreaking at the early 2021 date. But right now we're hoping to get everything together and move that project forward, as well as continuing to work on the overnighter motel site and Brinshore development on that one. Unfortunately, they did not qualify for tax credits this year, so we are actively working with them on how we may be able to bring that project to fruition with other funding sources and partners and opportunities. So that's something that we may be returning to the board with an update on as we get more information. And then as far as 2021, we anticipate completion and ribbon cutting of 6 other affordable housing projects, ranging from the Exchange and Paper Box Lofts to Central Station and Diamond Rail. The Capitol Homes project should be completed this year, as well as Jackson Apartments. All in all, it's a total of 652 residential units, with just over 400 of those being affordable. That will come online in the next year. And then our continued efforts in finalizing the creation and adoption of our 9 Line and State Street reinvestment areas, as well as we are continuing our work at analyzing and doing our survey of information related to a project area surrounding Research Park. And then we have several projects that we are involved in with other city departments and outside agencies. We just met yesterday with UTA regarding our Central Station joint RFP for our properties there, as well as our role in the Folsom Corridor and the ballpark revitalization. And then our 300 West streetscape improvement is moving along, and we hope to get that initiated. And we're also looking at ways that we can implement the improvements in design to 500 West. And of course, in 2021, we want to continue to provide an opportunity for the Gallivan Center to pivot. You will, if you weren't aware, we did not open the ice rink this year, and instead we entered into a partnership with the Downtown Alliance to install winter public art for people to come and view and have that as part of our activation for the plaza. And we are continuing to look at ways that we can do the excellence in the community and expand upon that, as well as other opportunities that, depending on how long COVID lasts, that we can look at other opportunities for activating plaza. And then one of our other priorities for 2021 that we wanted to update the board on is, here's a list of recently adopted policies that we have done over the past 4 years. And then moving forward into 2021, our priorities are obviously public art just got approved, so we appreciate that. And then continuing to work on updating and revising the land disposition policy, as well as the policy for the housing framework and the allocations that you just were briefed on and took action on. And then once those are done, we also want to take a look at our loan program and update that within the context of the housing side. That if we have the housing framework in the program policy, then we probably want to update and tweak our current and existing loan program to pull out of that and or update the language within that as it relates to currently as it relates to affordable housing, and make sure that we are clear and those are complementary. Tammy, do you have anything to add on any of that?
I think you covered it. We also want to look at the loan program and potentially other policies in regard to the new livability benchmarks that were just approved, so we can make sure that all of our policies point to those livability benchmarks and that they're aligned across all RDA programs.
Yeah, and I should also add that two of the ones we didn't add on this because we don't know yet if they will be separate policies or integrated in a similar fashion, like the benchmarks, is how we incorporate the city's efforts and priorities both for equity and sustainability. And so those are two things that we're working on right now, and we'll obviously come to the board in some form in terms of how to integrate that and incorporate it in how we do everything. And then some of the more boring things that we work on but have a huge impact on our operations and a priority both in terms of just updating the agency and our operations. First and foremost, as I said, is our efforts to integrate and align with the city's plans and initiatives for sustainability and equity. Second is always looking to improve our communications and try to get out to the public more and be more transparent, as well as reporting our success and our metrics to our other taxing entity partners as it relates to their participation with tax increment. This is something that we continuously hear and recognize that we need to update and always improve how we communicate that. And then a really exciting one, which is just integrating our filing system with the city's overall Laserfiche system, and also just reorganizing our internal filing and how we track projects. This is something that, as we were compiling information for our 50-year report last year, we realized that we needed an overall system that survives better when project managers leave and we have to go back and look for information. So something that we are prioritizing for us internally. And then the second piece of that is financially, we are migrating our loan portfolio to a new system that is also in alignment with the cities, so that we can do that as part of assuming the Housing Trust Fund portfolio and make sure that that transfer is as seamless as possible. And then also continuing to work with how we integrate what we just took action on with the housing funds and the separate buckets of those, as well as the GALLIVAN budget and integrating that, and then just always looking to streamline our own internal agency budget and project area accounts, especially as it relates to ECHLs. And then Tammy mentioned this with the guiding framework, continuing to look at ways that we can integrate that into our projects and our programs and policies to make sure that we are always viewing our participation within that lens. And then looking to update our specific project area work plans so that we're looking at those on a more regular basis to check in and make sure that we're coming to the board with our priorities as ways of how to carry out those plans and aligning our priorities with funding on an annual basis. And then I think to speak to our next steps with this and maybe how we touch base with Vice Chair Valdemoris is following up on some of the recent meetings we've had, and I think where the conversation with this presentation came out of, is just continuing to touch base with the board and administration on long-term agency strategic planning and how we integrate that within what we do, with always an eye on the future and the direction that redevelopment agencies are going, as well as what our priorities for the city are. And then utilizing that to set our priorities for project area creation and strategies, and then also to put into context how we evaluate and participate in developer-initiated projects and requests. So that's something that we look to continuing to structure with the board on a regular basis of how we just have those regular touch-ins for that. And I think that is it as far as what we've done and moving forward and kind of what our focus is on. What questions can we answer?
Anybody?
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Danny and Tammy. That was wonderful. I appreciate all that because you guys have done a lot of work throughout the year, and I appreciate it very much, especially with all the things that have been going on. My question is on the affordable housing. You know, you mentioned you gave us a count on for 2021 of 406 out of, like, I think 650 some odd units will be affordable. That's a wonderful ratio. I like that a lot. I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have any numbers what we did in 2020? Do you know how many ballpark we did affordable compared to total?
Tammy's probably pulling her spreadsheet up right now.
And I've lost connection with the VPN, so I can't, but we have a spreadsheet that the board has seen before, and we continuously update it, so we could email it out to council staff and they could send it to you all.
Yeah, that'd be helpful because, you know, we've had that discussion last week about the gap between what people can afford and what's being built. So I just wanted to see that, and especially if there was a breakdown on the different levels, you know, 80% AMI, 50, 30 downward. And then the next question is on, when we talk to the developers, do we ever give them a say, hey, we want 25%, 15%, minimum 10% of affordable housing? Could you refresh my memory on what that our discussions are with the developers when we talk about housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's multiple parts to that answer because it really depends on, one, the project, and then how the project is coming to us. So as it relates to if it's a property we own that we put out for disposition, typically we are putting those terms on it when we put it out on the market and indicating to developers what we would like to see in our preferences for development of that, as far as number of units, break down what our targets are. So a good example of that would be the overnighter, as well as our State Street projects where we took direction from the board on both of those as far as our priority. If it's a project that a developer is coming to us and asking for a loan on, then that is one that we usually review within the context of what their project is and the specific pro forma and what they were proposing. And then we would obviously gauge and recommend our participation for board's approval based on what we feel is appropriate in terms of what they're asking of us and what the gap is. And then as Tammy said earlier with the NOFA, that is another tool that we can put out on the market specifically to developers with targets, whether it's affordable housing at certain levels and mixes, or whether it's home ownership, or whether it's high opportunity areas. So really based on kind of what the tool is that we're using, the funding that's available, and whether it's an agency initiated or a developer request for participation, we take all of that into account.
Okay, so we don't set a percentage. It's almost each individual project we give a determination at that point. We don't give it, hey, we're always going to go with 25% or 15% or 10%. It's always individual developments.
In recent NOFAs, we have set a minimum of 20% of the units must be affordable at 60% AMI and below. However, we also state that the funding request will be evaluated in consideration of the portion of affordable units. So we want to incentivize affordable housing in projects that aren't necessarily built as an affordable housing project. So those projects might have a lower portion of affordable units. So we really evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. And the RDA board, but it was a few years ago, had provided direction to RDA staff that their priority is that we look at the portion of affordable housing in the context of the neighborhood. So for example, on the overnighter project, 1500 West North Temple, the board actually adopted a resolution limiting the portion of affordable units to 50% of the units. But then our project at 255 State Street, since that's more of an opportunity area and affordable housing lacks in the downtown urban core, I believe that project is 90% affordable. So we look at the neighborhood context as well. And then when we issue an RFP, oftentimes we do set a minimum percentage of affordable units based on that neighborhood context.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Very helpful.
Andrew, thank you, Dan. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Andrew, did you have something?
Yes, Madam Chair, if I might. Maybe going back to the overnighter, the council just passed a new and improved, hopefully, demolition ordinance. What are the plans for the overnighter motel going forward, Danny or Tammy?
As far as development or demolition?
Demolition.
Demolition, we were on track to get that. It was approved for demolition and we were working on that. At that time, the fire broke out at the motel. That threw a little bit of a curveball into the abatement that we had to do prior to demolition because it made it a little bit more complicated when you're doing that after a partially burned structure versus one that you can go into and remove the hazardous materials. So I believe we are on track to bring that down rather shortly, but that has been a challenge with the demolition ordinance of just getting it to where we were prior to that fire.
When you say shortly, are we talking months, weeks, years?
I think we're probably looking within the next month or so.
I appreciate that.
Being able to start demolition. Yeah.
Okay. It's a hard conversation to have when they're asking, is that an awful property and it's city owned?
It is, and there's probably not the forum to do it, but I can tell you that, the RDA doesn't get any special treatment with relation to the demolition ordinance that was in existence, and we had to jump through all of the same hoops, and I think we were able to get a little bit of consideration for it being a nuisance and speed up the process that way, but it is a challenge, and we're excited with the new ordinance to hopefully streamline that and speed it up for future projects.
Excellent. Yeah, I understand it. I mean, this is city ordinance. You got to follow city ordinance. So, but I think we'll get a lot of cheers from that happening. If Madam Chair, a second question for next year about projections. There's a lot of competing interests, and I know we're in the planning stage, at least somewhere in that planning stage for Station Center, Granary, and looking at Research Park. Are there others that I'm missing right now as far as areas we're actively working right now or planning on?
As far as new project areas?
Yeah, or existing ones that we're sort of putting a lot of time into.
I mean, our top priority right now is finalizing the 9 line in State Street. Obviously, those are ones that have taken quite a bit and have been challenging to get them finalized. And so that has been our priority. Beyond that, obviously, Research Park is one that we feel aligns a lot of different city goals and recognize that there's a lot of interest in making sure we get that right, or that our level of participation is put to the appropriate use. And then Granary and Depot and all of the transit initiatives are ones that there is a significant amount of interest both from the public and partners, as well as the development opportunities that are occurring there to make sure that we have the resources available to see those happen in a way that we would like to have happen within the city and our goals. So beyond that, I think we always want to focus on the project areas that we have and that we're working on within the context of CBD and North Temple. CBD is going to be important in terms of working to activate and revitalize downtown coming out of COVID and make sure that is. And then as this board has indicated, we have a lot of priorities within the North Temple project area in terms of the Fair Park and opportunities there for property development that I think should be top priority for us as we go into next year's budget. So.
Okay, yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes about how we allocate our resources based on the briefings and staff time and money, et cetera. As I'm around the city, though, I understand the downtown concerns about rebounding from COVID. I'm more concerned about North Temple and Ballpark. If I look across the city and see the areas that are deeply underinvested and struggling with current businesses, development, other things, I can't find 2 areas in more distress right now. And so if we're not allocating more than enough money there, if it's disproportionate there, I'm totally fine with it because we can develop some nice new areas and we're going to fail at 2 other areas in the city that are struggling right now if we don't. So as a member of the board going into next year, hopefully there's not another COVID issue, but I really want to look at over allocating resources to certain areas because we're falling behind even as we're standing today. So I'm worried about that.
I appreciate you bringing up Ballpark because we think of that in terms of it's surrounded by the State Street project area, but that's a great point because we're also working, as we indicated in that report, with the city on revitalizing directly the ballpark, but also doing that within the context of a larger area plan of how to revitalize that and address a lot of the concerns you brought up. So just wanted to clarify that we kind of lump that in with State Street, but it obviously has its own direct set of issues that probably warrants a more targeted approach.
Are we doing proactive work around those areas? Or because I know oftentimes we get approached, you all, but as a whole, we get approached by developers to sort of drive where they're interested in. Are we doing proactive work around those 2 particular areas to help develop sort of interest and support?
Within the ballpark, I mean, right now our focus and approach is obviously within that area directly adjacent to the ball field, but we are also working with transportation on the small area plan that takes a look at a much larger area in that context and how to kind of activate and achieve development goals there. I think with respect to the proactive approach that you're speaking of in terms of response to crime and issues of the neighborhood, we're a little limited there because it's not an official project area yet. And so we are not able to really go and expend funds there just yet. But I do think that's something that as part of our project area seed funds that we can continue to look to allocate in next year's budget, that we can do that with an eye on targeting those resources to something more specific within target areas of that project area.
Thank you, Danny. Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments from anyone? Questions?
Madam Chair, if I may, I just want to take the opportunity that all of this happens because of our amazing staff. It's a great opportunity to sit here for Tammy and I to relay it to the board, but we have an amazing team and staff. Amanda put the presentation together that I think always kind of puts it in a great perspective and light, but we have a lot of people working on these projects tirelessly, and so I want to make sure that they get the credit they deserve in terms of seeing these projects come to fruition.
Thank you, Danny. And you took the words out of my mouth. And I really appreciate looking back at, even though this year has been really hard in a lot of different ways, a lot of great work was done. And a lot of paved the road for a lot of future great work. To see that ratio of 406 affordable units coming on, which is what, probably 50, 60 some % of the total amount, maybe even a little more than that. I mean, that's pretty awesome. And to know that we got some of these affordable units up and running during this year is also pretty awesome. So thank you for that presentation. I'm sad Anna wasn't here to see it, but I'm glad we didn't skip it. I think we kind of needed to see the work that has been done despite all of the things that have happened in Salt Lake City this year. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I do know that we have somebody who wanted to give a comment, and I would ask that we wait until after agenda C5. So if whoever's talking with our commenter, if we can let her know, I'll get to her after C5. So we'll move straight to C4, which is an informational briefing on 650 South Main Tracks Station funding. And once again, we have Danny.
Yes, I'm really here just to tee it up for Kara. I just wanted to clarify that recognizing this item is informational and listed as such. I think if it meets with the board's approval, we would like to ask for at least a straw poll releasing the funds for what we're updating and proposing in terms of moving forward on the project. So having just teed it up in that regard, I'll turn it over to Kara, who's going to provide a status report on the project, as well as an update on where we're at with some of the budget and discussions with developer participation. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay? I like to check first, make sure I'm not still muted. And Bobby, could you bring the presentation up, please?
Yes, one moment.
Thank you. Great, thank you, Bobby. Do you think if we put it in, maybe see it a little bigger if it's in presentation mode? Okay, looks like that's what we can do. Thanks. So I guess I'll just move on to the next slide. Great, thank you. Just to give a little background on the project, you guys have probably noticed that there's a lot of development occurring around the area of 600 South and 700 South and Main Street. There are 3 projects under construction right now that you might have seen the cranes for and going up very quickly. So over the past couple of years in our discussions with the developers of the projects in that area, we discovered an opportunity to build a track station at 650 South Main Street using funding contributions from the private property owners there. This station location was part of the original 1997 plans for the north-south line for tracks, but it wasn't built, obviously, when the rest of the line went in. The RDA appropriated $639,000 for the station in the fiscal year 19 budget. But as we continue to talk with developers and learn more about their timelines, we discovered that not all the projects would be funded in time for when the funding would be needed for construction of the station. So we returned to the board in November of 2019, and the board appropriated another $750,000 to cover those future contributions from projects that would be getting started later. Next slide. This map of the area shows the locations of the nearby projects. I labeled them 1 through 5. The ones shown in yellow are the projects that are under construction now, and then the ones shown in orange, numbers 4 and 5, will be starting down the road a little ways. Next slide. Actually, sorry, I should go back on this slide and show you where the track station is being proposed. The red X shows the future location of this track station, which is on the north block of the Main Street block between 600 and 700 South. Okay, now I can go to the next slide. So we've been working with UTA, Salt Lake City Transportation Division, and Salt Lake City Arts Council to design the station and select public art for the station. We executed a design agreement earlier this year with UTA, and that provides funding for the design consultant to design the station. And that appropriation was from our $639,000. CRSA was selected. Oh no! CRSA was selected through a competitive RFP process, and now the 30% construction documents are complete. Next slide. This is a rendering of the station and its current level of design. It is based on the design for the 900 South station, which also went in after the original construction of the north-south line. Like I mentioned, it will be located on the north half of the block between 6th and 7th South. And since the station was included in the original plans in 1997 for this line, the space for the station was already planned for. So there's no track work needed to put this station in. And there's a mid-block crosswalk around 660 South on Main Street here. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that we've been working with Salt Lake City Arts Council to select public art for the station. We executed an agreement with the Arts Council so we could provide the funding for the selection process and ultimately for the artist who is selected. 3 finalists were selected by the Art Design Board from the Arts Council's artist pool, and proposals from those 3 artists were reviewed by the Art Design Board over the past couple months. This piece here is shown, that's shown in the slide, is the selected artwork for the station, and it's titled Crossroads, and it's by Gian Lee Lodge, and it was just selected last Thursday. Next slide. Okay, so getting into the numbers, this slide describes the funding approach for the project. So we have been using an estimated construction cost of $2 million. And as we move forward with the design and get closer to finalizing that, we'll continue to refine this cost estimate. But this shows that starting with that cost estimate and then subtracting out the RDA's appropriation of $639,000, we have about $1.3, $1.4 million needing to be funded that developers have agreed to contribute to. So we then calculated a weighted score that takes into account the acreage of each property and the proximity of the property to the station. And using that weighted score determined the contribution for each project. So when we looked at the map, we saw that 3 of the projects were already underway. Those are the first 3 projects listed in this table. And then you can see the number at the bottom right of this slide. We're asking for $788,000 to cover the gap that remains as we continue to pursue contributions from the 2 remaining projects. And as I'll discuss in the next slide, this $788,000 is proposed to come from a previous appropriation by the board of $750,000 for this project, and then $38,000 in State Street seed funds, State Street project area seed funds for fiscal year 21. So can we go to the next slide? So for this request, we're asking the board to release the funding that was appropriated in the 2 budget items that I just mentioned. And I think Danny mentioned this at the beginning, but in the past, the board has done that with a straw poll. And if this approach is approved of by the board, that will allow us to move forward with finalizing the construction agreement with UTA and then continuing to negotiate the participation agreements with developers. And then last slide. Next. But it looks like the screen froze up a little. Okay. I just wanted to quickly go through the schedule for the project. Our construction agreement with UTA is finalized and ready to execute. I just wanted to note that the construction agreement lays out the roles for the RDA and the UTA in this project. The RDA will be responsible for collecting the contributions prior to construction. UTA will do the project bidding, construction management, startup testing, and then ongoing maintenance and operation of the station. Once we have the construction agreement executed, we can continue to negotiate with developers and execute those participation agreements. Final design will be complete in February of 2021, and then construction is anticipated for summer and fall of next year, with the station opening by December 15th of 2021. So that's all I have for the presentation, but if anybody has any questions.
Questions? Yes, Board Member Mono.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So assuming we, it sounds like the 600 and whatever amount and the 750 was already approved. So really it's just the additional 38,901. But my question is, so if we move forward and we start construction, what leverage do we have to actually get those remaining developers to reimburse us those amounts? That's my first question, because it seems like if it's already happening, they've already broken ground. How do we get that agreement in place before? And then the second question is, so my understanding is that this will be all reimbursed once those projects actually move forward and get financed. So does that just go back into, where do those go back into? Like, does 38,000 go back into State Street seed fund accounts for other projects in State Street? I guess I'm kind of piggybacking off of our board member Johnston's comment about within the State Street project area, it feels like this is much closer to CBD than, like, for instance, Ballpark. And I just want to be cognizant of, if we're using it for this, what are we not able to do? Maybe there's not another project ready to go anyhow.
Yeah, those are great questions. In response to the first, as far as leverage, as Kara indicated, two of the projects that the ones that we are continuing to have conversations with the developers on their contribution, it should be noted that one of those is really just phase 2 of the Patronelli Group as part of their purchase from Sinclair. They've already indicated their commitment and participation in it, and really the reason that has been split is because that property sale just has not happened yet. And so Patronelli is obviously just looking to make sure that they're not overcommitting for property that they don't own yet. But I think we're fairly confident in that one, that either between Patronelli or Sinclair, that they would step up and we'd be able to finalize that in what's the word I'm looking for, previously to that sale actually happening. So that one, I think we're in a good spot, and we just want to make sure that we're doing it in the right order of operations. The other is the Coleman and the Sears block. And again, that is just one where they're not necessarily at that point with their project to where they've designed it, determined who is going to be doing the development and or who may or may not be the owners. So those conversations are ongoing with them as to when is the proper time for them to commit. With regard to leverage, we know that they are interested in working with us as the agency and within the State Street project area for some participation within their project. And so our leverage obviously would be that as part of any participation in their project, we would want to see these funds get paid back to the agency or committed to by the developer prior to construction. So that would then just become part of our negotiations and discussion with them as part of any role we play. So we're hoping to get those in place really prior to beginning construction, but if not, if the agency covers that, then we just put ourselves in a position to try to kind of get those later in the conversations with either one of those developers as their project proceeds. If those funds do come back to the agency, then it'd be our intention that those would probably just go right back into the State Street funds. This is a project area we haven't received any increment from. So these seed funds are actually allocated from our program income account in anticipation of those project areas coming online and having some money to start infusing into the project area right away. And so obviously, if those funds come back to us, the board, if wanted to, could reallocate those from the State Street project area and seed funds to something else. And we're willing to kind of put that as a note on that when these funds come back and leave it up to the board to decide where they go if and when they are reimbursed to us.
Is that true of all three, like, allocations, that those are all from seed funds, or are there different sources?
The initial design, I think, just came directly from program income. And then the other funds came out of this concept of having seed funds go into a project area. There's a combination of those two, but they both essentially came out of our program income account, just with different descriptions on them.
Are there other questions? Andrew, did you have your hand up? Sorry.
Yes, Madam Chair. If Sears, whoever owns the Sears and develops it to block, asks the RDA for a loan or some financing of some sort, would they basically take that and some of that to pay us back for their fee?
I think we would structure it such that if they were to ask for funding to solve a gap within their project, that overall request incorporates them paying this to the agency for direct reimbursement, that it would not necessarily come out of that request as much as a condition of that request. And
is anybody else in these 5 parcels currently or planning on asking for RDA funding?
Not currently, no. I think where most of them are under construction right now, that they have their funding in place and are moving forward.
I would be slightly hesitant in the Sears block concept then to approve of that unless I knew a lot more information. We had some other things going on. It's interesting, sort of money in, money out. It depends on how you look at where the money's going in the accounts, but it's sort of asking us for money to pay, also to pay us a fee for this track station anyway. We'll have to, I guess, approach that later on, but it's a red flag in my head a little bit.
Yeah, understood. And I say that not that we don't have that information as much as we really have just not gotten to that level of discussion with them in terms of what that structure would be. I think where we're looking to structure this right now is set it up to where, you know, the agency has the ability to commit the funds to begin the project. And then as that conversation circles back to us, then we can do exactly what you've indicated and address that in however the board wants to. That conversation most likely would come back and we could report on that and put that request in the context of whatever our participation may or may not be and what's appropriate. But we simply don't have those details yet of what they're specifically going to ask for, who's going to make the request, what the gap is, and how this fits into that.
Do we have similar, it's not an agreement, I guess, but there's a lot of other parcels around that within a quarter mile of that proposed track station that could really benefit if they got redeveloped or sold. Is this a plan for all those parcels, or how has this come about and working?
No, this came about initially with our conversations with the Patronelli group, who are developing the office building right there in 6th South, and part of their request for us of what participation we could help in our role. And we were fairly limited both in terms of the project area hasn't been created, and we didn't necessarily have funds that were available that fit their gap. But this was something that they did indicate that they were very interested in seeing this track stop get built. And so that was the genesis of this conversation of, if developers are willing to participate and it provides a direct benefit to their projects, then those initial conversations took place with the developers who had projects in the works and were willing to step up and contribute funds. From there, we obviously expanded that conversation to Colmena, because obviously you can recognize that it's a huge benefit for their future development. And we knew that they were working on something. We just recognize and appreciate the fact that they're not quite at the same level as some of these other projects that are currently under construction and already have their financing. So this is, for better or for worse, somewhat of a placeholder for that conversation to continue to happen with Colmena. And we would very much hope that they support it at the same level somewhat indicated, but they've also just recognized that they're not prepared to really commit to anything at this time until they know exactly what their project is and how they're going to proceed.
I mean, it's late in the game to do a transit redevelopment sort of project around this station essentially, but I mean, some folks are going to make an awful lot of money because of public transit stock is going to go in.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, that's our motivation for recognizing it's a huge benefit to anyone who develops after the fact. And so I think it's worth noting, both as the board, that this is not a done deal, and that any request that comes to us, that this needs to be part of that conversation, so that it's not just a foregone conclusion that they may not necessarily need to have some participation or recognize some benefit from this. And to the credit of the other developers, I think it's actually, CARES worked very hard with Transportation and Vision and UTA, that I think it's very admirable, the developers who have been willing to step up and participate and contribute hard money to this, because they do see the benefit to their project.
Any other comments on this? As was mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, it would be helpful for the board to maybe even just take a straw poll on the feelings of the board for this $38,901. I can understand Andrew's concern, but I also think that that is a necessary track station, and we did commit $750,000 earlier last year to that track station and the improvements there, and working with UTA. So I would look for a straw poll if anyone's interested, just so that at least the RDA staff has some direction of where the board is thinking.
Madam Chair, I'll make that straw poll. But I also want to point out that this track station was in the original plan that was never built. So that's why for me it's a no-brainer. We're actually going back to the original plan where it needed to be there. So I make the straw poll that we fund the additional money needed for this track station.
Okay, everyone's heard the straw poll. If there's no questions, just indicate with the thumb. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 votes at this point. I don't see thumbs from Board Member Johnston or Board Member Mono.
Madam Chair, I'll support, but things have changed. James, I agree. Things have changed over years. I mean, this is not what it was 97, but I'll support it at this point.
I'm
Okay.
just not, I think I'm not convinced yet. What,
Okay, this straw poll is everyone except Board Member Valdemoros, who is not here, and Board Member Mono, who votes nay, but it does pass to support this.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
one thing that you could do is, I assume this will be coming back to the board. If those folks who have a concern about it want to think up any conditions or anything like that to attach to a motion in the future, we, I'm sure, could help with that, or RDA staff would, I'm sure, also.
Thank you, Cindy. And as per always, I do always like to offer Danny's services without his permission, but still offer them that if people want small group meetings to answer some of these questions between our staff and RDA staff, I think some of those concerns could be addressed. So I want to move on. I do want to say my understanding is that there were, before I move on, there were some people in attendance that wanted to give a general comment. I want to clarify that during RDA board meetings, the general comment section is in relation to RDA business. I think many of our people that may wanted to have comment were wanting to comment regarding the fleet block. At this point, the fleet block is not, I mean, the RDA has no hand in the fleet block. They're not, there's nothing there. So it is not RDA business. It is general city business. And if that is what you are wanting to talk to, I would direct you to our staff and they can assist you in getting into the formal council meeting with general comment period at that point. So with that, I will, if there is a commenter regarding RDA business, one of my staff can and let me know and we'll go from there. But agenda item number 5, which is the audit review and approval. Sorry, I'm going to introduce who we have at the table. I apologize, Michael.
That's okay.
We have Michael Mickelson and I believe Paul Skeen is with us. At least that's who's on my agenda.
It's just me today.
Just you? Well,
Yep.
That's all we need. So I will turn it over to you, Michael, to present our audit review.
Wonderful. I assume you can hear me already since you responded to me. All right. Thank you for having me today. I'm grateful to be here. We provided last week, so that hopefully they're in your packets for today, the draft of the financial statements with our auditor's report and the draft of a couple of letters we're required to issue as well. So hopefully you have those. I will start going through our auditor's report. So that's on page 2 of the financial statement packet that you received previously. There's a paragraph there that talks about management's responsibility for the financial statements, and it's a short paragraph that management's responsible for the preparation and the fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. The next section is the auditor's responsibility, and that's a little bit longer. That talks about our responsibility. The second paragraph there details some things that I've mentioned in previous meetings, but the board does turn over, so I'll go through that briefly again. We determine using our judgment and experience as auditors the audit procedures that we will perform, but in determining those, there are some things that we do in planning first. We make an assessment of the risks of the material misstatement of the financial statements, the various line items, the type of transactions that the organization is entering into, and determine whether or not we think there's a likelihood of error related to either just mistakes or fraud, and we assess that risk. In performing that risk assessment, we also consider the internal control relevant to the entity and how they handle and process the transactions on a daily basis. So we look at the internal controls in order to gain that understanding, but we don't issue an opinion on internal control. The final thing we do is establish a materiality threshold. And that's the threshold where we believe financial statement readers' judgments will be changed. If there is a misstatement above that threshold, we believe that will affect a financial statement user's judgment about the financial statements. And a misstatement below that threshold is something that we believe a financial statement user won't deem as being very important, and it won't change their judgment in relation to those statements. So we quantify that, and then using those three things that we've done during planning, gaining an understanding of controls, assessing risk, and establishing materiality, we design our audit procedures. An audit area that has higher risk or higher materiality will get a little bit more focus and a little bit more time in our audit than an area that has lower materiality and lower risk. When we use sampling applications for our testing, an area with higher materiality and higher risk will end up with a larger sample size so that we do a little bit more work over that area. Then we design and do all those audit procedures and gather our audit evidence and determine the nature of the audit opinion that we'll provide in our opinion here on page 2. And that last paragraph is our opinion. It's an unmodified opinion that states that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects in relation to generally accepted accounting principles. So it's a clean opinion. It's the opinion that you hope to receive as a result of an audit. Wish we could stop there, but there's some additional information in our auditor's opinion if we scroll to page 3. During the audit this year, in performing our procedures and working through things with management, together with management, we discovered that in 2019, the restricted net position was overstated. And so we made a restatement to 2019 to correct that overstatement of the restricted net position. It was a reclassification within net position or within the equity of the organization. And so it was between restricted net position and unrestricted net position. But there were some resources that weren't restricted by external restriction or enabling legislation. They were more or less designated by an internal desire or board designation rather than enabling legislation. And so we removed those and made a restatement to 2019. And so we have a paragraph there at the top of page 3 that lets users know about that. Then the organization that establishes accounting standards for government entities, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, requires some additional information that they call required supplementary information. So the management's discussion and analysis, that's right after auditor's report, and then the schedule of contributions and the related pension schedule that follow the footnotes are required supplementary information. We don't express an opinion on that information. We do some limited procedures. We read it and we tie it out in total to the financial statements themselves that we audited. But because we don't do enough work on that information, we don't provide an opinion on that. So that middle paragraph on page 3 just lets readers know about that information and that that's not covered underneath our opinion. And the final paragraph discusses some supplementary information at the very back of the financial statements. There are some schedules there at the back by project area. And we perform some limited procedures there. Again, similar to what we do on the RSI, we tie it out to the information we've audited. We tie those back to the financial statements. And we issue an in relation opinion that says that we believe those supplementary schedules are fairly stated in relation to the basic financial statements, which we've opined on. So that's our auditor's report in the document. Now, in the interest of time, and because you've already seen these as part of your fiduciary responsibilities, seen the financial statements, I won't go through those. Following the financial statements are a series of footnotes that provide some information that isn't readily available or readily readable or discernible from the financial statements themselves in a tabular format like they're presented. It deals with things like policies where there's an option between accounting policies that can be selected. It discloses which policy has been chosen. The footnotes also provide some additional information that just isn't able to be presented tabularly or in the tabular format in the financial statements themselves. I will draw your attention to one note there, and that is the last note on page 40. It details the quantification of the restatement between the unrestricted and restricted net assets that I talked about in that first paragraph on page 3. So that shows the amounts that were reclassified in that restatement of 2019. And as far as audit adjustments, there was that one for the reclassification. And then there was one other audit adjustment that we had as a result. There was an entry to record the income from your investment in a UPACA joint venture that had just been recorded the wrong direction. And so there was an entry to flip that and make that go the right direction. So the credits and debits were reversed. As a result of the audit, those were corrected. And so the only difference you'll see in the 2020 statements between what you've reviewed on a periodic basis and what you see here is that entry. It was about $1.4 million. So one of the letters that we issued in conjunction with the audit details this restatement, which we've already discussed. The other letter is some required communications that we're required to make when there's a board charged with oversight, which this board is. It's an oversight board. It's very similar to what we've provided every year, so I'll only hit the highlights there. But the first one on page 2 of that letter deals with significant estimates. Financial statements, any financial statement in any organization do consist of a number of estimates. Some are more subjective in determining than others, and some are less subjective and easier to determine. The one that we think is the most significant is the pension estimate that's received from the Utah retirement systems. So the city and the RDA really aren't involved in calculating that, except that the city does allocate it among the different departments once it receives the information from Utah retirement systems. But Utah retirement systems hires an actuary to help them determine that pension liability based on the benefits that have been promised by the pension documents, estimated mortality tables of the underlying participants, estimated rates of return, and assumptions like that. So there's a lot of assumptions that go into that, and it's an actuarially determined liability. And so because of the nature of how difficult that is to calculate and how subjective that is, depending on the estimates determined by Utah retirement systems going into that liability, it's a significant estimate. So we just are required to communicate that so you're aware of that. Other than that, I've already covered everything else in that letter that's important. There's another reference to the correction of the error or the restatement in the financial statements in that letter. So that's everything I have to communicate today as the results of our audit. Oh, one more thing. This is a draft. We got to the point where we could provide a draft. We had one more review to do in-house in our quality review. There were a few grammatical changes and some rounding changes that changed $1 or $2 here or there so that the statements and footnotes would articulate. But there was nothing significant, no significant changes between this draft and the final financial statement we plan to issue our report on. Timing wise, we were waiting for a couple of things, one of which was returned today, and that was an update on the legal letter from the city attorney's office. So the final thing that we need to do now is have management sign a management representation letter, and then we will be able to issue this final report. That rep letter just formalizes in writing a number of the representations management made to us verbally or implied during the course of our audit. So we'll provide that to them following this meeting and be able to issue this in the next day or two. Now that I've gone through all that and done all the talking, what questions do you have that I can answer?
Thank you, Michael. Do we have questions from board members? Yes.
Sorry, ma'am. This is probably a question more for the RDA staff, but the 1.4 million that was redefined as unrestricted, but previously designated as restricted, what accounts were those in, or was that in? Do we know?
Madam Chair, I believe that Mike Burns can help us answer this question. This is Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Board Member Johnston. The 1.4 million actually was the error that was where I had recorded a journal entry backwards. So that does not deal with the restatement of net position. The error I made was I restricted things that the board had already dedicated funds to, not realizing that it was only external restrictions that should be categorized that way. So there were some loan funds and some of the other project funds that you guys had already committed to projects that I included as restricted. But since those restrictions were internal, that was an incorrect reporting. So, and you can see by the note, the last note that Mr. Mickelson referred to, the change that made. Obviously, there's no difference in the amount of cash or the amount of net position in the agency. It's just a matter of which bucket it was put into.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Excellent. It's a great audit, so that's awesome. Thank you. At this point, if there's no further questions, I would be looking for a motion to accept the draft.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Wharton, a second by Board Member Johnston. I will roll call this. Board Member Wharton.
Yes.
Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Board Member Dugan.
Yes.
Board Member Mano.
Yes.
Board Member Rogers.
Yes.
And I am a yes, so that is unanimous with Board Member Valdemoros not present today. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for your hard work on this. I feel like
You're welcome.
one of the
Thank you.
things you were waiting for was for me to answer the question, so I apologize for my own delay.
Well, we got him in time, so thank you for responding.
Great. Well,
Thank you all. Have a
thank
good
you.
day.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Yep.
Bye. So C6 is a motion for meeting remotely without an anchor location. In your packets, this motion is there. I don't know that I need to read the whole thing, but it states that as the chairperson of the Board of Directors of Redevelopment, basically we determined that there's still a global pandemic. There's no way for us to have an anchor location without substantially risking the health and safety of others. So I'd be looking for a motion to approve this motion.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the motion or to ratify your decision to continue to meet remotely without an anchor location.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion from Board Member Wharton and a second from Board Member Dugan. I will roll call this. Board Member Wharton.
Yes.
Board Member Mono.
Yes.
Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Board Member Dugan.
Yes.
Board Member Rogers. And
Yes.
I am a yes. That is unanimous with Board Member Valdemoros not with us today. Item C7, report or announcements from the executive director. I saw Aaron pop in for a minute. Excuse me, Mayor Mendenhall pop in for a minute. Thank you, Mayor. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Good. Any announcements from you?
No, not in this meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Report and announcements from RDA staff. I will turn, I think, the time over to Danny Walls.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I realize we're coming up at the end of our time, so I'll be quick. But I wanted to say something at the end of this meeting, recognizing that this is not technically your last RDA meeting. However, I think it's officially the last one you will probably end as our chair. Wanted to take a moment on behalf of staff and the department to thank both you and Vice Chair Valdemoros for your service with the agency. Normally, if we were meeting in person right now, we would be presenting you with an amazing gift of appreciation, but since we're not, you don't get the gift. No, just kidding. I assure you that we have a gift and we will be coordinating with each of you to deliver that later this week. I know Anna's not on the meeting, but we wanted to thank her personally for the guidance and perspective that she has brought to the agency. It's unfortunate that it has been through the year of COVID and we have not gotten the chance of interacting with her more. But we obviously look forward to doing that in the future when we're not dealing with pandemics and natural disasters. And then Amy, it is my privilege on behalf of staff to sincerely thank you for your time serving both as Vice Chair and then Chair of the RDA. To say you've made it interesting would be a huge understatement. So what I will say is that we genuinely appreciate you being a champion for both the RDA and staff. You have done so with a very sincere desire to understand our issues and projects, and we appreciate that. You have defended us, and you have probably also created a lot of work for us at the same time along the way. But most importantly, we appreciate your leadership in helping us to guide our new policies and programs and your direction for the agency. We hope that when you look back, you recognize the impact you've had as chairperson in this role. And so from all of us, thank you for all of the extra time and energy you've put in. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. I'm gonna cry. I just do. I cry over everything. Everybody here knows that. I thank you. And now I think it's my turn because my agenda says report of the chair and vice chair now. This is my last substantive RDA meeting as the chair. I have been in the RDA leadership since I came on the council, from vice chair my first year to 2 years of chairing. And it has been amazing and hard and just a really incredible experience. We've done a lot of hard work and have been through a lot of interesting situations over the last 3 years. And at the end of the day, no matter what seems to be thrown at you guys as staff, you all handle it with ease and grace, at least in the faces of all of us, whether or not you pull your hair out after I walk out of your office door. You never actually let me show that, you never show me that. You work tirelessly for this city, all of you, from Danny and your staff. I look at the projects that you have done just in 2020. Again, as I said, in the year of all the years of a dumpster fire, you still worked tirelessly for this city, for the priorities that our board and our mayor have in affordable housing, in creating connection and opportunities and access to those opportunities, in creating spaces for people to actually live, play, and work in our city. That's what you guys do. And I am humbled and proud to have been a very, very small, annoying part of it. Along the way, have had the opportunity to really make some amazing friendships, and to have people that put up with me when Amanda hands me a script and I basically say, thank you, I'm going to say something completely off the wall that Amanda was like, oh goodness. To Corinne and our love for llamas. I have an alpaca farm that we need to go visit together. To Kara and Tammy and the whole staff, everybody, all of the assistants that had to put up with me slamming doors when I was angry and coming in annoying them when I was happy and giddy about some project. And of course you, Danny, being somebody that has challenged me and supports me and the efforts that we are trying to make here in this city. So thank you all. And I know I may not be the chairperson next year for the RDA, but I will still be just as annoying of a board member. So we have that to look forward to. I really appreciate you guys so much. So thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, that's our last board meeting of the year. Congratulations, everyone. We made it through the RDA board meetings of 2020. I think we have another link for our council meeting, and I know we're probably running late. I will turn it over to Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, we are just a few minutes behind. So if everybody will just quickly make your way over to the council meeting, if you have to take a quick break, go right ahead, but we're going to start in 5 minutes.